Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Adam Karaoguz. Just a just a quick background. I spent 27 years in the U.S. military, and then a lot of my bachelor's and masters are kind of focused on international affairs, irregular warfare. Did everybody see that? Okay. Okay. All right. So we are going to talk about a couple different concepts here. Lene Rachel Anderson's concept of polymodernity, and then generations of war theory from some military thinkers. So first, I just want to flag this difference between complicated and complex. I think it has a lot of
Adam, I'm
important.
just gonna we can see sort of the Zoom videos on the side when you're sharing your screen. I wonder if you could hide that.
All
Yeah,
right, how
cool.
about that? Is that
Yeah,
better?
that's great. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So real quick, so this distinction between these two words, I think, is important, and I think a lot of us kind of already are aware of the difference. But going back to the Latin roots, you've got to fold versus to weave, and I think a lot of our problems in the modern world go back to this. Thinking we can apply these complicated um, tools and processes to complex things. So you can take a car engine apart, but you can't like take a tree apart, and put it back together. Like that's kind of the difference between the two of those. And I think I'm just throwing that in there at the beginning because it's, I think, relevant to a lot of the things we've been discussing here. So this is Lene Rachel Anderson, Scandinavian thinker, and I like this framework. It's probably familiar to a lot of you. It's very like Ken Wilber-esque, that whole group. So I think I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is whenever you paint with a broad brush, there's gonna be things that don't fit, right? But I think this is like a useful in the sense of George Box, like all models are wrong, but some are useful. Like, I like to kind of look at this model as a general framework here. So we see these uh, different cultural codes proceeding through time, but the big theme here is increasing complexity. Um, Now things are always complex for humans, but I think with the change in this age is probably the technology element, allowing the interconnections that were not previously possible, right? So her case here is that in increasing social complexity, we need to like be able to adopt different codes a little bit more fluidly than we have in the past. So that's her idea of polymodernity. You're like transcending and including in the Ken Wilber sense to get to polymodernity. Much more of like a network understanding, the mycelial network versus other linear reductive ways of viewing reality. So with that being said on her, and then a real quick distinction here that I think is helpful is between the character of war and then like the nature of war. So these things are gonna some things are gonna change with the culture and technology, but certain things remain the same. And you can generally bend them into violent, interactive, and political as kind of the nature that is constant throughout time. Just how much is violent is probably debatable, right? But the character is going to change over time. So William Lind was a thinker in the U.S. military circles. With some gentlemen, they came up with this framework for generations of war. In the end, this is like 1989ish. They came up with this framework. So um, I would say like zero generation would be pre-industrial warfare, right? So they take it back to the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 as kind of the birth of the nation state, and then the beginnings of this like industrialized form of warfare. So we start to get gunpowder, firearms, we get uniforms, we get this culture of order. So in this first generation here, this is going from the Peace of Westphalia up until around the Civil War, so 1860s. And this is very, uniforms, line and column, saluting, careful, trying to impose a lot of order on the battlefield. So this begins to slowly break down over time. We get into the second generation, which is generally World War One. We're still trying to impose order on a very disordered battlefield, and we're trying to centralize everything. So this is trench warfare and artillery type attacks. Very centralized. You're trying to like conduct an orchestra. So this works towards the end of World War One. The Germans begin to innovate. They start to come up with the third generation of warfare, but it's kind of comes too late in World War One to help them. And then, but it does help them in World War Two in the beginning. So this, the big change with the third generation is moving from, breaking that stalemate, maneuvering, changing your speed and tempo to get around your adversaries. And this proved, obviously in the beginning of World War II, it proved a very a potent way of fighting. And then the U.S., still to this day, like, we aspire to this, and the first Gulf War, we enjoy this method of war because it kind of like makes sense to us. But everything, every action is going to impose, counteractions and adjustments. So other folks in the world look at third generation war and they think, I don't want to fight that way. I don't have the resources. I can't go toe to toe. So we're going to think of ways to counteract this generation. And that brings us into the fourth generation, which, scholars kind of differ on when this starts. Definitely probably 1950s, some of the like guerrilla insurgency type conflicts, all the way up into present day with what we see on the world stage. But this is the big change here with fourth generation war is warfare is now below the state level, and it's being practiced by smaller groups. So the state is kind of losing its monopoly on war here in this fourth generation. This is very much a battle of asymmetrical forces. So, and a battle of narratives, and the media becomes even more important in this generation. So now we get to the fifth generation, which is where, some scholars believe we are. And how this would change would be the addition of technology and the understanding that perception and shaping thinking is now more important. Like kind of the Sun Tzu quote, to win before fighting, right? So you're trying to set the conditions to prevail in the moral sphere, in the sphere of narrative, in the sphere of ideas. And so it's a war of information and perception. So we can see this here. Pepe is just an example from the 2016 election of mimetic warfare. So spreading ideas online in a way to foster a particular narrative. And I think Pepe had a lot to do with the victory of President Trump in 2016. But it's just an example that this form of warfare is, has both like domestic and international components. So that is a quick tour around those. This is where I'm just kind of lining up these generations and showing kind of how fifth generation warfare connects to polymodernism as kind of the method of this cultural code. And what are some of the implications? So what I'm trying to show here, I did a like design inquiry. I'm trying to show that Westphalia, like the nation state model, is now kind of like breaking down, and we're seeing power flow to sub-state actors and supra state, so above the state level actors. So you see kind of existential risk on here, you see technological changes and some of these different elements. And then in the essay that I wrote, I kind of broke out some of these different actors and what they're able to do. But you see like Wall Street Bets, the subreddit, causing like a financial situation a few years ago, right? Like these small groups that then have like nonlinear effects out in the world. So Westphalia breaking down, and in the essay I talked about kind of the polarity, right? So a unipolar world, there's one hegemon. Bipolar, is what we had in the Cold War, right? Like two powers. And then multipolar would be, several different powers. And that's kind of the most unstable international order as well. But Peter brought up the idea of multiplex, and I went and looked up kind of the international affairs thinker. So I like the metaphor of this like multiplex, or the image, a little bit better, because polarity is just really kind of about power, and like hard power, but there are other forms of influence and power that aren't captured by polarity. So the multiplex gives you like these different components, like city states punching above their weights, small organizations, and so it shows you the range of actors now on the world stage. So in a lot of ways, we're going back to the way the world was before Westphalia, where smaller entities had greater power on the world stage. So it's almost like a reversion to the mean in that respect. So, and then just some takeaways. Like I was just imagining, like, what does this look like in actuality, and like, what are the takeaways for everyone of this world? So just kind of the Star Wars bar. It's just like you don't know who you're going to run into there. It's just like small organizations, networks, countries, all these different, super empowered individuals. It's a big group of people. So attention. So realizing that like the attentional commons is incredibly important, like where we put our attention. And fifth generation warfare is about controlling the perceptual space. So understand that like when you're on the internet, you're consuming media, like you're being bombarded with stuff, right? So you have to recognize that your attention is now a plane of conflict in the world. And so what does that mean? That means um, just being more mindful of that is the world that we're in now. We're on there. We are we're buffeted by the winds of our media, right? And then so technology is not neutral. This is a point that like people like Daniel Schmachtenberger make, Marshall McLuhan. These things, they're not neutral. They have values built into them, and we have to kind of like see that, because we're kind of like the fish in the David Foster Wallace, where we don't realize what water is. But like the media is not neutral, and it's going to change things, right? So that's the other big awareness piece. And then finally, like humility about like what we think we understand about um, what we're seeing, and trying to find different perspectives, seeking out alternative perspectives. And I think this group is kind of like I'm like preaching to the choir with that, because this group is very like kind of curious about different ideas. So those are my big three takeaways. I encourage everyone to just read the essay, because I kind of like go into more detail that I can't right now. But I guess I'll pause right there for questions.
Mm, awesome. Give Adam a round of applause. Awesome job, Adam. And I think the military kind of perspective on worldview shaping is so important, because if you don't have an awareness or sensitivity to that, you're not really in the game. Um, uh, I think this book is coming to mind, The Emergence of a New Politique, with John and David. I think John was your supervisor, or part of your
Yes.
thesis. Yeah. And I'm curious what you think of this framing of new politique, and how you know more people can be of engaging in it in a way that's sort of more pro-social rather than manipulative.
Yeah. I'd have to go back, and I haven't. It's been a minute since I read that, but I think I'm definitely sensing a lot of, yeah. I guess as we ascend to like a more world culture, I think we're kind of we're definitely moving towards, coalescing towards like different perspectives. I think we are losing, some of the ideas of the past are going to kind of like lose their hold on us, and we're not kind of like chained to those. And then the trick, I guess, will be, how do we have the discernment to bring forward, what is valuable into the new kind of globalized consciousness? And I
Mhm.
don't know. I don't know the answer.
Do you have any recommendations or thoughts on how individuals, like people who are drawn to, the Stoa and this course, could protect themselves against, you know, fifth generational warfare, and perhaps have greater agency related to the previous question?
Yes. So yeah, in the essay, I quote Mark McGrath, who I showed you. He had like a kind of a 5T framework for kind of analyzing. It's really just media literacy type frameworks. So, I think a lot of us grew up in a world where editors vetted content, media, and so there was like a filter. But now we're not in that world anymore, for good or ill, and so everyone has to have this like extra layer of discernment. So definitely, um, media literacy is very important. I try to talk about that. It's like it's almost like your hygiene, your like physical hygiene. It's like the same way with like your digital hygiene. So you have to try to be mindful of like the things that you're consuming because they are altering you. So yeah, there's a couple different formats like just for seeking alternative sources, and drilling down into that, and then look at the 5T framework that Mark McGrath has, where it's just you're kind of evaluating a message and trying to see like what are some implicit frames that are in this message that maybe are not like apparent at first glance, I guess I should say.
Mhm. Yeah, I really like that 5T framework that you had. That was in your article, right? The Polymodern?
Yes, yeah, I quoted him. Mark, he's got a Substack called The Whirl of Reorientation.
Right. Yeah. So I'll put that in the chat in a moment. But yeah, great job, Adam. It was a good presentation to kick us off. So let's give a minute or two of silence. Yeah, give some encouragement, some praise in the chat, and put like a thought, any question that you have for Adam in the group to consider. And then we'll do that for a minute or two. Then we'll move on to wealth.